قتل كان للأبرياء كنا ضده، يعني لست وحدي، أنا كان كثير من الناس التي يعني لديها ضمير ولديها وعي ولديها فهم صحيح للإسلام والدين كانت ضد قتل أي بريء، حتى لو كان يريد أن يتسبب في قتل كم كبير من العدو وأن يقتل شخص واحد بريء، نحن كنا ضده يعني لهذا الأمر.
Why didn't you quit then? I mean, why stay with an army whose major tactic is to do mass suicide bombings that inevitably or intentionally killed civilians?
يعني هو نحن كنا دائما نسأل.
The Americans will say, you know, they came to liberate Iraq, and that had you not resisted that, constant car bombings, IEDs, snipers, all of that, there would not have been so much bloodshed.
ولولا وجود الأمريكي لما كانت توجد مقاومة.
Syria inches closer to defragmentation, starting with the capital of Damascus, as the Islamists start to produce videos of mass executions of former SSA fighters, as well as Alawites within the country, and those who will not conform to the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham leader, Mohammed al-Jolani's wishes, which is to create a caliphate within Syria. It's going to be a lot of points we're going to be assessing here with you about what this means for the West and Israel regarding their foreign policy plans of the future for Syria, and also to the motivations of Islamists who are coordinated together to basically create a second government within the Middle East. Well, the first government within the Middle East, whereas Afghanistan's in Asia, regarding an Islamic caliphate. Most of you know that I'm not into, fringe conspiracy theories. I basically like to report what I see without bias, without prejudice. Now, the key strategic questions: when and how the Syrian government will succeed in reestablishing full sovereignty over its territory. Well, that has failed now. With Assad out of the country, the Syrian army fragmented, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham will consolidate military, political, and economic control over Idlib and now Damascus. Now, we have a really disturbing trend here. Now, for some of you people, basically, that want to say that, well, the Oded Yinon Plan was basically a conspiracy theory, and we shouldn't give it any real serious contention. Well, that's not true fully. The Oded Yinon's destabilization plot against Syria was intended to fragment the country along sectarian lines, rendering it too weak to help liberate Palestine or even recover the Golan Heights, which is basically what the whole plan was. Now, Oded Yinon revived the idea of former Labor Foreign Minister Abu Iba that the Middle East is a mosaic of ethnic divergence. The form of rule, therefore, appropriate to the region is the millet system of the Ottoman Empire, wherein administrative rule was based upon local functionaries presiding over discrete ethnic communities. And this is a quote from Oded Yinon, quote, "This world with its ethnic minorities, its factions and internal crisis, which is astonishingly self-destruction that we could see in Lebanon and non-Arab Iran, now also in Syria, is unable to deal successfully with its fundamental problems," end quote. Now, what is Oded Yinon contending here? Well, he contends that the Arab nation is a fragile shell, waiting to be shattered into multiple fragments, where they're now allowed to consolidate and regain their strength. Now, what Israel must follow through with is the policies it pursued through the inception of Zionism, which is seeking to purchase local agents among factions and communal groups who will assert themselves against such communities at Israel's behest. Thank you, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Thank you, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And now it's Mohammed al-Jolani's turn. And what Oded Yinon basically argues is, quote, "The Muslim Arab world is built like a temporary house of cards, put together by foreigners, France and Britain in the 1920s, without the wishes and desires of the inhabitants living have been taken into account. It was arbitrarily divided into 19 states, all made up of combinations of minorities and ethnic groups which are hostile to one another, so that every Arab Muslim state nowadays faces an ethnic, social destruction from within, and in some, a civil war is already raging, and quote, and that is gospel, because that's exactly what happened in the Arab Spring, just to keep it recent. Now, what does the Oded Yinon Plan basically say about fragmenting Syria? Quote, Syria will fall apart in accordance with its ethnic and religious structure into several states, such as in present-day Lebanon. By the way, this Oded Yinon Plan was written in the 1980s. So that there will be a Shia Alawite state along its coast, a Sunni state in the Aleppo area, another Sunni state in Damascus, hostile to its northern neighbor, and the Jews who will set up a state, maybe even in the Golan Heights. This is almost coming to fruition. Now, this is 40 years old. And certainly in the Harun and in northern Jordan, this state of affairs will be the guarantee for peace and security in the area in the long run for Israel. And that aim is already within our reach today, end quote. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like a conspiracy, ladies and gentlemen. That sounds like a revelation, a plan. And, you know, Oded Yinon had a couple of things to say about the Syrian army. And I'll read you, again, this is a quote. I'm not making this stuff up. Coming from the mouth of himself. Quote, Syrian army today is mostly Sunni with an Alawite officer corps. The Iraqi army, Shiite with Sunni commanders. This has great significance in the long run. But that is why it will not be possible to retain the loyalty to the army for a long time, end quote. Now, he proceeds to examine how the civil war, which has been inflicted on Lebanon by means of financing Major Saad Hadid at the time in the Lebanese south against the Gemel's Falang around Beirut, which they hope was extending into Syria. Well, what does this mean now, right? Because right now, the de facto leader of Damascus is the leader of the Tahrir al-Sham, the reformed moderate rebel group, as CNN basically states. Now the UK is basically saying we need to take off Tahrir al-Sham from the terrorist watch list. What? We're taking a designated terrorist group that has killed tens of thousands of people in Syria, Alawites, Sufis, Shia, even other Sunnis. And for those who actually believe that Mohammed al-Jolani is reformed, need I remind you what this guy is really about? Now, again, I'm going to play a clip from the film The Jihadist, which was published in 2021, I want to say, or 2020, regarding who Mohammed al-Jolani really is and what the group Tahrir al-Sham basically is about. Let's watch.
Jolani would rise through the ranks of Zarqawi's organization and caught the attention of a CIA analyst.
I mean, my job was to identify some of the initial leaders of Zarqawi's organization and to keep track of who is in his network and who's helping make decisions.
Jolani came up as a commander or of some sort in Zarqawi's organization?
Yes.
Can you say anything about that?
Probably not. I mean, he wasn't top tier, but he had cell leadership at that point.
At that time, around 2004, Iraq faced near daily attacks from insurgents, including those that targeted civilians. In fact, the toll was so high that even Al Qaeda's leadership, concerned about their image, protested the killing of so many innocents. They sent a letter by courier to Zarqawi. Let us not merely be people of killing, slaughter, blood, cursing, insult, and harshness. Zarqawi rejected the advice.
Shock and awe, but this time Sunni insurgents were sending in the bombs. The series of coordinated blasts were in mainly Shia areas. Sunni militants, out to stoke sectarian tensions, did so with ferocious efficiency.
Around 2005, Jolani's jihadist career in Iraq was cut short. He was arrested by U.S. troops in Mosul. He would spend most of the next 5 years imprisoned in Camp Bucca near the Kuwaiti border. Around 100,000 detainees came through Bucca, including 9 future al Qaeda in Iraq and ISIS commanders.
In fact, it was the training ground for a whole new generation of Middle Eastern extremist terrorists. The most extreme elements had total control of the camp. The U.S. military didn't see Bucca as a big problem. But what was happening in Bucca was it was a wholly owned subsidiary of al Qaeda.
Jolani was around 23 when he arrived. He said he used his time to write a 50-page paper on how to fight jihad back home in Syria.
I definitely heard that from some of his key lieutenants, that he spent his time in Bucca quite wisely, and that he did come up with a pretty long document about how he wanted to take the jihad to Syria.
يعني هو كان بحث تقريبا تحليلي، الخطة ما يقارب تقريبا 50 صفحة سردت فيها تاريخ سوريا وجغرافيا سوريا والتنوع الطائفي في سوريا وكيف وصل يعني عائلة الأسد إلى الحكم وما إلى ذلك.
Do you have a copy of that document?
No, لكن ما عندي ضاعت.
Of course not. Look, there are similarities within the outlines of the Oded Yinon, where Israel's foreign policy plan for Syria and this guy's. I'm not saying they work together, but my goodness, when you have a Wahhabi Salafi jihadist and a Zionist foreign paper that are basically overlapping one another, what do you think that means? Well, they share the same interest, which is the defragmentation of secular Arab governments. Just like the Egyptian Islamic Jihad under the paper The Neglected Duty, which was written by Abu Mohammed al-Faraj, where he basically says that in order for the Islamic Caliphate to prove to fruition, Sayyid Qutb's ideas, right, of fighting against the West was to take over secular Arab governments, the near enemy, as he called it. And then when the Caliphate is ready, they can fight against the far enemy, which, as al-Faraj once wrote, the United States and the West, Israel. Fast forward to 2024, folks. Here we are. The Taliban in Afghanistan, along with al Qaeda in the central government. Now we have Tahrir al-Sham in Syria. Boko Haram in Nigeria, Sudan. Al-Shabaab, another al Qaeda affiliate. Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Al Qaeda in the Maghreb. I'm not even counting Pakistan in all this, home of the Tariqi, I forgot the name, Tariq al something, another Pakistani offshoot. Now, what really precipitated for an Islamic government in Afghanistan, which is basically the real hub of Islamic militancy, not in Syria. They might be, but right now it's Afghanistan. Not Iran, not Lebanon, not what the fucking major news networks in Israel are saying. Well, all these right-wing fundamental like Ben Shapiro, Matt Gaetz, and these fucking frauds that want to fight against Iran. No, the real Islamic militancy are in Afghanistan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, Pakistan. Always has been, always will be. Now, for the Doha Agreement, or the Doha Accord, which was a peace agreement signed by the United States and the Taliban on February 29, 2020. Thank you, President Biden, President Trump. It was negotiated by the U.S. by Zalny Khalilzad, who is the American diplomat. He was the special representative for Afghanistan under the Trump administration, where the agreement did not involve, of all people, the Afghan government. There's a reason for this. Now, the reason is a little bit quasi-conspiracy, but bear with me. Now, the deal, I'm going to read it straight from the document itself. The deal, which also had secret annexes, was one of the critical events that caused the collapse of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. That sounds a little bit similar to what happened in Iraq with the Iraqi Provisional Order number 1 and number 2 under L. Paul Bremer, who was an attaché of the Bush administration, where they liquidated what? The police and the army. And what happens when you don't have a police and an army of a nation? Sectarian violence. Bingo. The Doha Agreement did just that, because when they liquidated the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, the U.S. dramatically reduced the number of U.S. air raids, leaving the defense forces without a key advantage in keeping who at bay? Fucking Taliban. It's almost like we're going to let the Taliban grow and take over the country after 20 years of fighting. The longest war in U.S. history didn't defeat the one enemy that they needed to defeat 20 fucking years. And we're going to fight against Iran when we can't even beat goat herders in Afghanistan. This resulted in a sense of abandonment within the army and the Afghan population. Now, that's coming from the Inspector General report of the Afghanistan Reconstruction Plan. Just Google Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, and you'll see the whole outline of how the United States basically failed the Afghan people. And of course, with this plan, the Taliban took over the country on August 15, 2021 in record time. The entire country. But also, the agreement stipulated fighting restrictions for both the U.S. and the Taliban and provided for the withdrawal of all U.S. NATO forces from Afghanistan in return for the Taliban's counterterrorism commitments, which they never kept. They now ban women from school. Remember in the beginning? Oh, when all the lights were on, we're going to let women go to school. We're going to let women go to learn. We're going to be the bastion of reformation. Well, they're back to head shopping and putting entire blankets on women. The hijab and the niqab. And anyone who is willing to fight against the Taliban are stoned to death or shot. Jolani made a lot of promises saying that we're going to live in peace. Meanwhile, already today, there's fucking dozens of videos I saw on Twitter of members of the al-Sham, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group shooting people in the face, killing these people without trial. And some of you people basically celebrated the fall of Assad. Now, there's a few people out there reporting, as is Aaron Matea's one, Rachel Blevins, Ronnie O'Colick, Abby Martin, everyone at the Libertarian Institute, and Scott Orden, Connor Freeman, Kyle Anzalone, and Will Porter, and the rest. And those guys are doing a phenomenal job of daily reports. In fact, next Friday, I'm going to do a special video about Syria with Connor Freeman. And we're going to talk about Syria and the future thereof. But I'm going to keep reporting the news as is. And I think this is going to benefit, the real axis of evil. The real axis of evil is the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And this is the countries that gave us imperialism in ultra-Orthodox form or in ultra-nationalist form. And it's basically coming to fruition that the entire Middle East, along with Southeast Asia, are going to become an Islamic Maghreb hot ground, where Islamists will be governed by self-appointed leaders like al-Jolani, God knows who else, and Hamza bin Laden in Afghanistan. And like I said in my previous video, if you think for one fucking second that they forgot about us here in the United States, I have a bridge to sell you because of what we did just in Gaza alone, much less fucking Yemen, much less Afghanistan, much less Iraq, much less Libya. We are in big motherfucking trouble. And I'm sorry to be very obtuse here, but I've been telling you this for the last 2 years to do not forget Al Qaeda. Do not forget the Islamists because they're still around, even though they're weakened. Well, now look, there are 2 countries under the total commitment, the total power of Islamists, Afghanistan and now Syria. They're still fighting in Libya. And if we destroy Lebanon, if we destroy Iran, God knows who's taking over there and what this will mean for the future of the United States, their economy, and the safety and security of the people. You think Israel cares? They can give a flying fuck. Now, I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the government. All you groypers and Nick Fuentes, I don't need you. I'd like to win you over. It's not about right, wrong. It's not about Christian, Muslim, Jew. It's not about white and black. It's about right and wrong. What is evil and what is good? And if we don't stop this evil, then it's going to manifest into the good people because they'll give up. And we can't give up. Either we fight against the people like al-Jolani or allow for these monsters to basically destroy what's left of the Syrian people with Israel fighting alongside them. Because Israel's military is now extended north of the country, near Damascus, near fucking Damascus. They've already breached the buffer zone. Golan Heights is now annexed. And Netanyahu, the prime minister, basically admits to it. Doesn't care because nobody's going to give a shit. And the only people that give a shit are the countries we're destroying. The people who are against Israeli and West's foreign policy. And rightfully so. So should you. All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. And of course, this is a hot story, and I'll keep you updated as usual. Stay safe, everybody. See you in the next video.